We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order and call the roll visually around the table. Elise Mortimer. Here. Jack Hoffberg.
Here.
Bob Silverford.
Here.
Jennifer Piper.
Here.
Brad Stetcher.
Here.
Shannon.
Here.
Beth Cook.
Here.
And Pat Allen here. Trevor Herbig is not yet with us. So has everyone had a chance to take a look at the minutes from May 1st? Are there any corrections, changes, additions, things you wish you had said that you didn't? Things you said that you would rather you had not? You can't actually change those last two things. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I make that motion. I did look at the minutes, and except for a few typos, which I'm sure you caught.
I'll look back through them.
Everything's fine.
Thank
Is
you.
there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes, subject to final proofread. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We don't have public here for public comment, so let's take a minute just and see if there's any debrief anybody particularly wants to do from the election results. I was quite pleased to see, there was always some question in my mind of were we on the right track and were we proposing things that people thought were worthwhile changes, and so I was pretty pleased to see overwhelmingly all 5 of our proposals were approved. So that kind of answered the question in the absence of people being here to tell us we were on the right track or the wrong track. It looks like we did all right. Any other thoughts or comments as we look at those results?
Well, I do think that one thing that probably helped was clarity, which was dividing them into their
Yes.
individual bits and pieces,
I
rather
think
than,
that's right.
giving everybody a mouthful. Says, here's your bites, and you can understand what you're seeing and saying, and I certainly think that assisted with the results.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it also helped people not have to worry about was there some weird interplay between things that they had to figure out to decide whether they wanted the whole package. They could really look at a thing, and if they didn't like it, they could vote no on that thing and know that if everybody else voted no, it would go away, and they were all independently operating pieces. Other thoughts about the election results? Okay, in that case, we've got a track changes document from Sylvia, and we're ready, I think, to move into the 6 items we have teed up for today, which are the city attorney topic in general, merit system compensation and those employment kinds of issues, council compensation, some housekeeping stuff we may or may not want to do something with on Willamette River Water and solid waste. I thought solid waste and the incinerator was the same thing. Am I wrong? Maybe not. And then the things that aren't in the chat charter but that flow from it. So let's start with the city attorney topic. That's section 35. And I think this is one we started to talk about last time and decided that we wanted to come back to, and it was, if I remember correctly, it was the notion that the city attorney, a lot of the language assumes that there is like an office of city attorney that is staffed by a hired person who hires subsequent staff, and that that's fairly different from practice. And we've got some red line language that we talked about last time as proposed changed language. And we decided, I think, that we wanted to take some time to think about that whole topic and come back and talk more about it.
Language looks good to me.
I do like that it talks about the office of the city attorney rather than the city attorney, which might indicate one single person. Being that if there's a firm, there might be multiple attorneys that, help the city with different kinds of topics.
I'm wondering if in that first sentence, which is existing charter language, if chief legal officer is really the right thing in that vein, or if it should be something more like chief legal authority or something like that.
Or just remove the R, chief legal office or authority.
Well, the only reason I would err on the side of authority versus office is, I think the implication is, if you have a legal question, you're going to get it from them and not from somebody else. And to me, authority says that better than office
I think
does.
authority does.
Sounds good to me.
Unless there's something else that you think is implied by that.
No, I believe that that's standard language
Do you think council might be a better word than authority? Chief legal counsel?
Yeah, that might.
Again, as long as council doesn't imply that it's one
One
single
person.
person.
Does it have to say city attorney, or can you section 35 say office of city attorney?
Oh, so this is the sentence that says the office of city attorney is established as the chief legal something.
Well, council would fit more with the legalese type of language if you're an attorney of council.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good.
Okay. So we think we want to take the red line language that we already have around that being a direct employee or the services may be provided under contract, and then also change the existing wording from officer to council with an S.
Do you want maybe in there or something stronger? Maybe is pretty weak. The city attorney maybe, that
Well,
to me implies it doesn't have to.
it's gotta be
Right, it
either
doesn't
or.
have to, it can be a direct employee.
Direct,
Yeah.
it may be
Right.
or.
You know, I see what you're saying, Brendan. So that sentence could say, the city attorney shall be a direct employee of the council, or the services may be provided to the city by a firm under contract, which would more clearly get across the notion of you gotta have a city attorney,
Hmm.
and you gotta do one or the other.
But since there's maybe in the second phrase, shall be in the
First,
first, it's gonna confuse things,
Mhm.
it's gonna be confusing.
How about the city attorney must be either
Yeah, there you
a
go.
direct employee of the council or, yeah, the grammar's tougher in the second half.
Or
of
you
the
could say,
sentence.
or the city may contract to provide these.
Or,
services.
yeah, so leave the may in the second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's still grammatically awkward.
I think in the second part, where it says the services may be provided, I think that's good, because you either then have the option of either an employee or contract with a firm.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've got, how about the city attorney may be a direct employee of the council or a firm under contract adopted by the council. And just take out or the service, so the city attorney may be a direct employee of the council or a firm under contract adopted by the council.
Yeah, not change it to shall be.
Excuse me, shall be, yeah. The city attorney shall be a direct employee of the council or a firm under contract adopted by council.
If that does it.
It just removes some extraneous language.
So the only thing I would add to that is shall be either
Yeah,
Yeah,
shall be either.
right.
a direct employee of the council or a firm under contract adopted by the council.
Mhm.
Gotta do one or the other.
Mhm.
Right.
But
You have to
they're
do
equal,
one.
and they're equal
And
choices.
there's equal, yeah.
Now, in the next sentence,
Yeah.
do we want to say, a majority of the council must appoint and may remove either the firm or the attorney?
Mhm. So, may remove the attorney or contracted firm.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mhm.
You know, we talked last time, I believe, or the time before, about the advantages of having a firm where you could have several attorneys who have expertise in different areas of the law,
Mhm.
and being
Yes.
able to use the one that you need at that point in time.
Then I think the last sentence needs to actually have added to it, if the city attorney is a direct employee,
Right,
Yeah.
the
correct.
attorney must appoint and supervise and may remove any office employees.
Right.
Mhm.
The only suggestion I might have on that is under office, and any office employees is any office employee is supervised by him.
Yeah, I agree, cause that makes it sound like it should just be.
Right, otherwise it gets, I don't like Sylvia's.
Or maybe just say under his
Office of, have
supervision.
a.
Right, under his supervision.
There or any office of city employee, or of city attorney employees.
Right.
So I have a thought or a question. We talked about the, through this budget process, the potential of hiring an in-house city attorney. And if a full-time city attorney would probably come with a full-time paralegal and or full-time or part-time admin. So with that type of a language, is that the assumption that that city attorney or the firm that has a contract with the council now has sole discretion over the additional employees in that office, where the city manager or they wouldn't fall under a normal process?
Yeah, so divide those two in half, because the second one I think is easier to deal with. I don't think you would envision a circumstance where there is a contract city attorney, legal firm, and city staff who are in the office of city attorney, right?
I can't imagine that.
Right, so that part I don't think is a problem. The first half, this would set up a dynamic where the city attorney has a small degree of autonomy from the city manager.
Yeah, it raises, that's a good point, because let's say the admin position in the city attorney's office, if we had it in-house, could be just a generic, the job description could be a generic admin administrative assistant too, like an administrative assistant in any other department.
Right.
What makes that person unique just because they report to a position that reports to the council?
Well, so like,
So I think,
yeah.
I mean, if.
So let me
it's
play
complicated, so-
devil's advocate out into conspiracy law land maybe, but sometimes that happens, so. There's a city attorney, and a city manager, and the city manager wants to do something, that has got the city attorney concerned. City attorney, informs the council of that. Council says, well, city attorney, go do some more research and bring us back, a brief on what our options are. City manager then fires the paralegal and admin person who works for the city attorney to thereby reduce the city attorney's capacity to do that work. That's not a crazy scenario.
No, and I guess I think it's the equivalent of your person, because you are hired by the city
Hire and
council,
contract with the city council.
contracted with the city
And
council, but
the
your
part-time.
assistant or your part-time,
Is a part-time city employee staff. I supervise, but that staffer is no different than any other admin 1, 2, or 3.
yeah, so council has no jurisdiction over her staff person.
Well, nor would they in this.
Do you hire and fire your staff
Right.
person?
In that
Right.
scenario, so
I
there,
supervise, but that staffer went through the recruitment process, the interview process, like any other
It wasn't
employee in the
just-
city. Correct.
So you still want to go through the recruitment process as a city employee, you would think. But you would just say that you want to be putting a layer of protection in case of.
Yeah, I think in my mind, and in making that argument, I'm not saying I necessarily believe that argument first, but
but that could happen.
But-
I mean, in
yeah,
some
what I'm-
scenario, I can see that happening.
and what I'm thinking of is in this area, there's some sensitivity to whether the city attorney, whether an employer or contractor, has an arm's length relationship with the council. And so, I mean, that would be I think what we'd want to kick around and figure out whether it's important or not is whether we think that's something we should respond to in this. And if we do, that would be one way to get at that.
Yeah.
Another example would be if the city attorney is in disagreement with the city manager on an interpretation. And, the city attorney may be researching charges against the city manager. And the city manager says, well, I want that admin working on that because that admin's gonna have dinner with me tonight and tell me everything that the attorney's doing. Not that would happen, but I mean.
It's an interesting question, actually.
Yeah.
And I guess what I would like to do is do a little bit of research.
Yeah.
Because you have the language now that says
That they do that.
that they have that responsibility. So unraveling that, I
Right.
think would require some thought.
All right, so let's redline it with the other changes that are, because that's all existing language.
Yes.
right?
Right.
So let's redline it with the stuff that we've already talked about. and then flag that one to come back and talk about again.
So redline it
Next
as
time.
far as remove it or,
No, I mean, do the other red line changes we've already talked about just now.
But maybe put a question about,
Add some blue language around this topic.
Okay.
because it's.
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Because if we do an in-house, Sylvia's right, it'll probably be at least two positions.
I would
It'll
think,
be
yeah.
an attorney and probably a paralegal of some sort to assist with.
Yeah.
And it could be as simple as, I don't know, the city attorney may appoint and supervise. That way may allows for that flexibility. It may remove any office employee, and you have may in the second portion of the sentence, why not in the first portion?
Well, because you don't have to fire your employees
Right.
if you want to. I think is what the intention is. Let's
It's a good
do
question.
some thinking about it, come back to that one. Anything else on city attorney?
There was the blue line discussion about hearings officer.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing about hearings officer, correct?
I'm aware of.
Well, but what Sylvia had pointed out and made a comment in the thing that she had sent out was that the municipal code references a hearing officer being appointed by the council, but there is nothing in the charter that discusses that.
You guys are gonna see if there was some sample language.
I've not done thorough research, but hearings officers, which a lot of cities have,
Mhm.
don't seem to be in the charter, it tends to be in the code.
Okay.
So the
And
way it is
related to
now.
community development, I know,
Right.
I mean, Hillsboro's one I should look at because they have a hearings officer, and I doubt that it's in their charter. Probably.
How about they go about getting a hearings officer as needed? Not someone that's
Yeah.
on staff,
Yeah, it
right?
is.
Right. Yeah, there's almost no hearings officers on, maybe the
Yeah.
Portland has some.
Yeah. Let me look at Hillsboro's because they're I know just from my experience, they have a hearings officer,
Mhm.
and let me look at where the legislation is to create that, whether it's in the charter or whether it's in the code. Because it's community development related. It's to hear certain types of
Right. Land
applications.
use. In our case, it's category
CUPs,
two,
right?
category two and three land use decisions. Okay, so we'll flag those two things to come back. Lydia, just to catch you up, we did some, messing around with the language on section 35 city attorney to make it much clearer and more grammatically sound that the attorney is either a direct employee or, a contract, a contractor firm approved by the council. And it was really all around the language to make that clear and make sure that the choices of either direct employee or contractor were co-equal choices, that there wasn't some implied preference in the language for one or the other. And then we just finished a conversation about the existing language around the attorney must appoint and supervise and may remove office employees, which actually does set up a degree of arm's length from the city manager in terms of the city attorney's staff. We talked about some pros and cons about why that might be a good thing. We're gonna come back and talk more about that next time.
Okay.
The
And
city-
under the two scenarios of contract versus direct, still report to council.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
not changing that.
Yeah, the question is what about the staff of the city attorney? Could the city manager fire the city attorney's staff? And we could imagine scenarios where there could be some perniciousness around that, and so.
Sure.
And we have the analogy with Sylvia's position, which is hired by the council, reports to the council.
Right.
She's got a staff person, and that staff person is a city employee, and I would argue that you guys, as a council, don't have jurisdiction over that individual. That person is a regular city employee subject to the authority of the city manager in terms of discipline and things like that. So it's just a question, more than an answer at this point, so.
Okay, so we're gonna come back on that, on those 2 points in that section. So that gets us to section 37, which is compensation issue. We flagged is around the language, the council must authorize the compensation of city employed officers and employees as part of its approval of the annual city budget, which implies a list of names and salaries, and does it actually work that way, and what should it do? And we've got a green note that you guys are gonna get some legal advice, and I wonder if you had enough time to be able to do that, okay?
Okay.
So it sounds like we're gonna defer that part of the conversation.
Can I say something?
Yes.
I'd like to congratulate you all on the vote. While the turnout was extremely low, I think that people really appreciated, clearly by the vote, especially the part on public comment, that, you know, people understood what you guys had put on the ballot and supported every single measure. So I think that that's a testament to your work and the conversations you had and the drafting of the ballot. So just wanted to do that before I forget.
Thank you. We actually did a round of congratulating ourselves.
Good job. I
That's
second
for the
that.
record. Okay, so then that kind of moves us right into council compensation, which we flagged from a note-taking standpoint here, but we decided really was a section 3 issue.
As well as the reimbursed for expenses.
Right, and I think the notion that we took around was that we, at least preliminarily, thought that we should have a standard that says, members of the council should not be compensated without a positive vote by the citizens, and compensation does not include, or reimbursement for ordinary expenses or language along those lines. And there's some charter language elsewhere like that, isn't there?
Well, there's the existing, section 37, says the mayor and councilors may be reimbursed for actual expenditures.
And that needs to go to chapter 3. It didn't fit where it is.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird
Where is it
spot.
now?
It's in section 37.
Oh,
but
37.
no.
That's it.
So that sentence seems to be in a strange spot.
Mhm. So what if we have an article or a piece, a section in chapter 3 that says the mayor and councilors may be reimbursed for actual expenses, no compensation above actual expenses shall be authorized without a prior vote by the citizens.
I can see something.
You don't even need to say that, you just say none shall be authorized.
Then you have
It'll
to
take a
change-
vote to change the charter to
That's a good point.
do it.
That's a good
So
point.
you've accomplished it without saying it.
That's good. Keep it simple.
So would you create a new section 15?
No, we go in, oh,
Under
Oh,
chapter,
yeah,
under
yeah.
chapter 3, would you have a new section 15?
Mhm.
Mayor, president, council.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think so. It doesn't really fit anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or you could, would you add it to section 7?
Under council, under elections?
Under
No, under
Council.
description of what the
Chapter
council
3,
is.
section 7, where it says council,
Oh,
and the sentence, read on one
It
sentence.
would keep you from
reads-
having to renumber everything else.
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
I'm looking
exactly.
Spoken like
I'm-
the
oh,
banker.
at selfish. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it gives a point.
Oh, yeah, you're right. You have to remember everything. Good points.
I think you could go there, council.
Part of me
So,
wonders,
council consists of the mayor and 6 councilors nominated and elected from the city. Councilors are not entitled to compensation, but may be reimbursed for actual expenses.
and what's an actual expense?
Oh, we don't say that now.
That would have to be established by council rules.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't address that in council rules. For example, my cell phone plan would not need to be what it is today if I wasn't a counselor. Because there's no way I can stay under, 1,500 minutes, which is my current plan. But I don't get any reimbursement. The mayor gets a reimbursement, but it's not written anywhere.
You know, and that's the thing, I mean, cell phone plans are so cheap these days, I mean, it's almost makes it better to have some sort of like 50%, I mean, it's something that, you know.
Well, so I guess my thought about trying to identify expenses is that's really, it's a political issue.
Yeah, I'm not thinking it's the charter,
Yeah, 'cause
but
if
when
we
you
try
say
to put-
actual expenses, I would think you would, expenses incurred while representing the council.
Why can't we just say expenses, comma, as established by council rule? Because aren't the council members supposed to establish rules at the beginning of every session?
Are we supposed to establish rules of our own reimbursement though?
That'd be the problem.
And
Well,
the-
no, you're not establishing rules for your reimbursement, you're only establishing rules about what the actual expenses would be considered.
So,
Right.
so for example,
For example.
you have mileage, you have mileage in
Meals.
town or out of town. You have meals, you have cell phone, you have,
Training.
training,
Parking.
lodging, parking. So those are various types of expenses that we see currently. And like Council President Henderson said, not everyone takes, opportunity or advantage of those expenses. Some do and some don't. And it makes it very difficult to budget,
Yes.
makes it very difficult to budget.
So as I'm sitting here thinking about this, try this out. I get nervous when we talk about either moving existing language somewhere else or taking existing language and adding a piece to it because it gets people wound up about something that's already there and has been working and isn't a problem. So I'm wondering if actually the best way to do this is to leave this, even though it's weird, in chapter 9. And leave the existing sentence and simply add to it and add to it in such that we say, the mayor and councilors shall not be compensated, but may be reimbursed for actual expenses. So all we're doing is adding to that, shall not be compensated.
Right.
And
I would
that'll
say
be the
actual
change.
and reasonable.
We can do that, because we're narrowing it.
I'm against listing every possible expense. We don't need that.
Is there a standard understanding, an industry understanding of what actual expenses are, as you said, Sylvia? Because I think that's sort of a amorphous language
So
again.
if somebody signed up for a $1,000 conference, that they say, oh, it's something that they should attend.
But to me, that's the political element. If someone does that, they get ratted out and the voters get to decide that that's bad behavior. If it's super bad behavior, they get to recall them. If it's just garden variety bad behavior, they get to vote for somebody else.
So one of the discussions that we've had at the budget level with staff is to allow the budget, allowing each elected official an X amount, $300 a year. $300 a year, you can use it for meals, conferences, cell phone, whatever you want, parking.
Mileage?
And once you've exceeded that amount, then you're done. Any additional expenses. But again, that's just been conversation at the staff level, that hasn't been conversation at the council level. Just to help through the budget process.
I'm not sure, based on the way that the charter's written right now, that would technically be allowed, because the charter already says that they would be compensated. What you could have, well, doesn't it, I mean.
It says may.
Maybe.
Okay,
And actual
right,
expenses.
but, I mean, you clearly, for example, could establish a, no receipt budget. You know, you don't have to submit anything to me as far as receipts, unless you exceed that $300. Then we're gonna.
No, that would.
But I don't want that, I wouldn't want that in the charter.
Yeah, that wouldn't be actual expenses.
Yeah.
I think it belongs in the council rules, I mean, the specifics, and that's.
The mechanism, yeah. So the last version of this was the mayor and councilors shall not be compensated, but may be reimbursed for actual and reasonable expenses.
Sounds good.
Where are you
I
reading
still
that?
think it ought
I'm
to be
adding
section
it.
3.
She's adding.
Back into 37.
Oh,
I'm putting it in
okay.
37, Brian, the only reason I'm nervous about it is because if
I
we
know.
go move it, people think it's new and start getting wound up about, well, they shouldn't get expenses or whatever.
Well, this doesn't indicate that they're getting compensated anyway, really, so why do we even have to add that in? I mean, there's no place in here that says that the council gets compensated.
So what's?
Well, but
So
there's
we had a
no place
dust-up
in
about
here that
this.
says that the council couldn't, designate their compensation.
Yeah, we had a dust up about this, actually, someone got kind of submarine on it, in terms of proposing compensation, and then it was,
I remember, and honestly, I think I was one of the people saying, I think it'd be great if the counselors could be compensated, is it in here? I can't remember that it says anything about that anyway, so I mean.
It
does.
does.
so they could propose, I mean, I think the
They
concern
could
is,
do it without.
they could propose it and just make it happen.
Yeah, but state law requires you can't enact compensation for yourself while in office.
Right, it has to be
You have
after
to
the
be,
next.
so like if my term ends in 2016, I could vote for compensation, but it wouldn't take effect until 2017.
Right. I just think it would be imprudent for any council, even with that restriction, to vote itself compensation without there being a vote
Is
by
there
the people in support.
compensation, in any of the charters that we looked
The
at?
only one that I
establishes
have
it?
is West Lynn.
West Lynn.
West Lynn has, and I'll read it, under the mayor and council, it says, the compensation for the services of each city officer, employee, council member, and mayor shall be the amount fixed by the council. As of January 1st, 2009, this amount shall not exceed $4,000 annually for each councilor and $6,400 annually for the mayor. This maximum amount shall be adjusted for inflation annually based upon the CPI for the Portland metro area. And that got added in 2008. So my read of that is, and I haven't confirmed this, is each counselor gets up to $4,000 to get compensated, but they don't get expenses.
Right.
It's like, this
That's
is
the way I
your,
read that.
this is what you get for serving, and you pay for your own training, you pay for your mileage, this covers your cost of being a counselor. I don't know why they did that.
$333 a month.
How much?
$333 a month.
Yeah.
I guess that's, I'm a little perplexed by how strongly some people feel about this. I mean, do they think we're gonna enact us a $5,000 a month paycheck? Is that the fear that we would just enact compensation without a public hearing and?
Well, it's happened in other cities, Linda.
There was that article of that city in California.
Yes, that was
ended
in
up
California.
being paid.
We're not
I
California.
know, but that's, but you're asking why is it there, it's because that was in the news.
Yeah, I don't think anybody on council or the mayor would do this,
Right.
but there's nothing to prevent it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody.
There's nothing to prevent us from asking Joe to buy everybody an iPad.
True.
That is true.
True. So I'm trying to help understand what I guess your motivation or other people in the town. I get two responses. You should want to do this for free, or I can't believe you're not paid. And so, you know, some municipalities have covered counselors on health insurance, so they've done indirect, you know, benefits. A lot of public officials are self-employed, so.
I would like to protect the future council from making the mistake of thinking it would be a good idea for them to adopt compensation
While in office?
on their own, well, no, not in violation of state law, but for them to adopt compensation solely on their own authority. I think that would be politically dumb. I don't think this council is politically dumb and would do that. I can imagine, we've nearly had a past council that did it. I can imagine a future council, and I think.
Yeah, somebody made a motion in my first year and it didn't get a second.
I'd like to protect the community from that level of potential malpractice were it to occur. And so the best way to do that is put it in the charter that you gotta have a vote on it. And I think you guys
And be clear
would
about that.
understand that and do that.
And then what would be the vote on? How much?
No.
Well, it would be a vote to remove the prohibition. You could have a blanket removal of the prohibition. You could have it be a dollar amount. You could do whatever you want, but you'd have to change the prohibition.
So you'd have to repeal it, and then you'd
Replace it with something else, whatever
Right.
replace it, or would you put it in the hands of the council?
you could.
And then mandate a public hearing?
I think, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't vote for a bill like
But,
that.
and Linda, I'd like to also be very clear that I would be delighted to have a discussion about whether or not the council should be compensated. And that's not the discussion that I have on the table today. The council I have on, the conversation I have on the table today is the process, not whether or not it should or should not be done. I wanna thank you for all of the service that you do put in it.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm just trying to understand what the
The
primary concern is.
The other thing I've heard, because this is an issue in a lot of communities around the country, is just
Philosophically, some people say, look, you know, you're serving your community, you shouldn't be paid for it. You know, and you may have strong feelings because you've been in office and, you know, feel a certain way, but I've heard that from people, is like, you're a volunteer council, and once you start getting paid, you're going down that path.
But there's a difference between being paid for your time and being paid for the expenses you're incurred while you're providing your time. And I think therein lies a distinction that I'd like to see.
Yeah, I don't
somehow
consider it compensation. For most
memorialized.
communities, it's a stipend. You know, it's the gas that you expense, the additional
Right.
cell phone,
Right.
you know,
Right.
the meal you have to buy on the go because you didn't have time to run and pick something up, but but I know some people feel really strongly about it.
Yeah. So where are we?
I think your language is fine.
Can you repeat
Yeah, can you
what Brian
Yeah, what's the
recommended?
language we're talking about?
Well, Brian's recommendation was that it belongs in 3. I wasn't sure if that was a statement of belief or an actual recommendation.
Well, can we understand what the language is first? Are you talking about moving complete section?
I'm good with the language.
Yeah, the language, wherever it ends up being, that I think we're sitting on right now is, the mayor and councilors shall not be compensated, but may be reimbursed for actual and reasonable expenses.
Okay.
And so that's, there's 2 questions, is that about the right language?
Language is.
And if that's the right language, do we leave it in 9 or do we move it to 3? I would argue for leaving it in 9 because then the only charter change is actually strengthening the prohibitions. If you move it to 3, it looks like we're authorizing stuff that's already in the charter, but it'll be moved. and so
Yeah,
it'll
the
look like
perception
new
is
language.
that the changes are much bigger than they really are.
But I'm not gonna die on that hill if people really wanna move it to 3. It does
I
make
think
more
that's
logical.
good.
I'm fine with your idea. It sounds good.
As
long as under
under
Do you
compensation.
want to insert the language without a vote?
Well, no, the point that got made is if you put that language in, then in fact, the only way to change that language is by a vote, so you don't actually need to say that. You'd have to replace that language with something different,
Yep, or remove it.
right? And that would require a vote.
Yep, and everything in the charter requires a vote to change.
Right. So it looks like I'm hearing that language and leave it there.
Right.
Okay. I'm hearing we're ready to move on.
I'm just concerned that in the ballot title.
Okay, oh, more excitement.
Well, I think the ballot title will be, prohibits council compensation, restricts expenses. Would be my guess.
I got a question I'd like to ask. If somebody submits an expense, where does it go and whose approval is required?
Kind of a two process. It comes to me because I process it, I code it. And then all of the entries into our financial system are approved by the city manager. Keep in mind, the expenses are already spent. So the city manager is approving something that's already been spent. So the
Because
approval.
most of the stuff you do is through the city's purchase card.
Correct.
So if there's a registration online, you're going in there and basically doing everything all at once, and I see it after the fact.
So it's not a reimbursable technically then, right?
But the
It
councilors
kind
use
of,
those cards?
no. Currently, a lot of this is unwritten. Again, unwritten process. A city purchase card is issued to the mayor, so the mayor has a purchase card, the other councilors do not. And this has been based on past practice of other mayors. Most recently, Mayor Mays, who had the longest tenure. Mayor Mays received a cell phone reimbursement equal to staff cell phone reimbursement. Current mayor chooses not to receive that reimbursement.
Which is $80 a month.
It's $80 a month. The other expenses that come through is if a counselor goes to a conference, goes to a meeting, a county meeting, and they submit their, on an expense report, their mileage. I calculate that on an expense report, and then that is reimbursed to them personally. So they get a check, they're set up in the system as a vendor, they get a check for that reimbursement. The other method is, Sylvia, I wanna go to a conference, will you please register me? So I'll register them, I'll use my city card to register, and those expenses, whether it's be on a city card or directly, expense directly paid to like official, is approved by the city manager after the fact. So those things occur and then he approves them.
Does the city manager ever see an expense that is above what would be reasonably expected and do something about it?
I have done something recently, and I wouldn't want to get into specifics, where I said no. It wasn't that the amount, it wasn't the amount, but it was an expense that I thought didn't meet the intent of the purpose and wasn't consistent with past practice. So it was to attend a fundraiser to an organization outside of this jurisdiction that the city is not a member of. So it was all done ahead of time, and I said no. Because I was like, I don't see how, again, it's not the amount of the money, it was like, it would be the equivalent of someone saying, I'm gonna go to a $65 a night fundraiser for the March of Dimes in downtown Portland, which is a fundraiser for a nonprofit who does great work worldwide. And I'd be like, why should city tax dollars pay for that? And the argument could be, well, March of Dimes does programs here, and someone in Sherwood probably benefited from the March of Dimes, and that, I would say no to that. That's actually what I did, and that was probably the first time in a long time that it was questioned. So I think there's this ongoing discussion that we're having at the staff level and probably with the council about, we need to put some boundaries around this, because, you know, there are opportunities for counselors who want to be engaged and active to attend all kinds of stuff.
There has to be a
And-
direct connection.
Yeah, and if everybody does that, starts doing that, then the budget's blown, because we don't budget for that. So I think, you know, and I've talked to some other cities about, do you have anything, and again, they're internal practices or in the council rules, it's not in the charter, in a sense. And if we don't get our arms around that, in a sense, things could easily unravel.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's
that was not an easy thing for me, quite honestly, to
I'm
do,
sure
to
it
tell one
wasn't.
of my 7 bosses that, no, the city's not paying for this.
It just is odd to me, coming from private industry where I dish out my money and then before my company, like Bechtel was probably the same way, before they agree to pay, they review yours and they can kick it back and then you're out.
Well,
of money.
and what's happened is I've had a conversation with this individual counselor, and that person has said, look, anytime I wanna go to something, I'm gonna talk to you first, because I don't want this to happen again.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
uncomfortable for that person as well.
Okay.
There was an
Right.
assumption made,
Right.
and again, it wasn't the amount of money, it was just the point of, where's the public interest for citizens for you to go to this event?
Right.
You know,
Thank you.
does that help?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I kinda would like to see council rules pick the ball up here and take a little pressure off Joe. I mean, he really is sort of in an awkward position, being the employee of council. He serves at the will of council, but he is the traffic cop when it comes to expenses.
Well, I made the suggestion to Sylvia that you just give everybody a budget, $200, $250 a year,
Yeah.
and you can use it for, I don't know about mileage, but you know, attending events where there's a lunch or a dinner. And when you're out, when your money's gone, your money's gone, and then anything above that, it's out of pocket. So basically, that would force counselors or members of council to sort of plan. You know, this month I have so much in my budget, and I also have some heartburn with the fact that it's a post expense reimbursement. I mean, if we get these invitations for things way in advance, like I just went to a West Side Economic Alliance thing this morning, was on emergency management. It came in, I sent her, I said, I'd like to go to this event. I would have assumed you forwarded to him and said, and this is an organization, you know, obviously
We
we're
are
part of.
paying, we're paying.
Right, and
member.
so it was $25 and I mean, I've never submitted an expense after I went for which I did not have approval for. Or I called staff and said, look, I'd like to go to this event, do you think it'd be worthwhile? And,
And Brian, the other thing that I learned from a couple other communities in terms of oversight is that, I think Tiger does this, is the council gets a monthly review of, these are the expenses that are reimbursed for each counselor and events, so they're kind of policing themselves, so if they see something that is questionable, they're talking amongst themselves as a council, rather than putting the city manager into a weird position to say, look, you shouldn't, that's not, you know, you get into an argument and a philosophical debate and over something that's probably, you know, $50,
Right.
but causes a lot of angst for both parties.
Yeah, my feeling here again, Joe, is be a great place for council rules to pick up the slack there. If they wanna set an amount, I have a little bit of heartburn with, I wouldn't wanna do it the same way Westland did.
Yeah.
And say, here's the amount, put it in the charter.
Yeah.
Right.
Because once you got it in there, and they did put some, you know, cost of living increases and stuff like that in, but still, when you have something like 2008 roll around, the city may not be in great financial shape and may not be able to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And now you've got a charter amendment that you have to change the charter to get it to stop,
Yeah.
you know? So I'm dead set against putting any amount in the charter, but boy, I'd like to see the council rules. You know, I'd like to see the council, you know, take this up on their own and fix it.
And quite honestly, you know, I ran a report to look at the last couple of years. They're not spending lots of money.
Yeah.
This isn't a big issue. It's just that as we evolve and get different people and, you know, just something to be, kind of pay attention to.
There's no real equity, you know, I mean,
Right.
some people go to everything they can get their hands onto, and some people go 2 or 3 times a year, and that's your choice.
Yeah.
But the money still comes from the same place.
Right. There are existing council rules that are written, right?
Yes.
If dated or
Yes.
on refresh or whatever.
And I don't think it covers us at all. I don't think.
Well,
We
let
just
me-
updated council rules last month,
Oh, did you? Oh, okay.
or we just
Well,
amended council rules.
sections of it, so.
So let me suggest, throw out maybe as an idea.
You'll be looking at them again next January.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, voters, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna suggest is I wonder if maybe once we're done with the stuff we need to do on charter by the timeline we need to get it to the voters for November, I wonder if the last piece of work we should do is we should take a look at those rules and simply offer advisory recommendations to council about things that we think they ought to consider dealing with in those rules, like the, you know, mechanism for
That's fair.
reimbursements or those sort of things. Maybe we won't have anything, and then all it is, you know, our giving them our thoughts on it, they can ignore them.
Well, the nice thing
The
about
rules
that,
are longer than the charter.
Oh, yeah, that's.
the nice thing about that is you're likely gonna have some new council members
Mhm.
in January. And I think,
Guaranteed one.
You know, at least one new one, so I think, you know, having that kind of outside advice saying, look, here's some areas you might wanna take a look at that we didn't wanna put in the charter,
Right.
but look like there could be problematic if you don't address them as a council.
Does that sound like a reasonable piece of work? So maybe if you could, Sylvia, if you could get us a copy of the rules sometime.
They're on the website.
Are they on the?
Yeah.
Under council, go down to the bottom documents,
Oh,
and
okay.
then council rules.
So do we need to?
If you want a paper copy, she could print you a paper copy.
Do we need to modify any of the language in the charter that directs the council to look at the rules on this, or no? Okay,
I don't
just
think so.
checking. All right.
No, I think this piece of work for us would be, since we know they're gonna do that in January, here are things we suggest they take a look at or
Okay.
changes they might make or
All
whatever.
right.
And there is nothing in our charter language that would prevent them from setting up fixed budget amounts
That's right.
for
Right.
compensation, or, excuse me, reimbursement.
Right, actual expenses.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to items D and E, which are, if you look at, it's the miscellaneous provisions, chapter 11 on page 11, and it's 42 and 43, and these are,
We skipped over 38.
we skipped over 38?
No,
There is,
Oh, merit system, sorry.
no, I think we
It's in the
just,
home rule charter.
we just had a question.
And then also, yeah, the League of Oregon Cities. Yeah, we don't do any of that. The only thing we pass by resolution, we accept contracts. So we have 2 labor unions. And we approved the COLA along with the budget.
Well, I guess our-
Chapter 9 is labor personnel.
Mhm.
To me, it should say city personnel. Because I think that's who is being addressed here.
Yeah.
True, but it's a city
And-
charter, so.
And the kicker is, that's what we hired Joe to do.
Right.
So why are we even asking council to mess with this?
But again, I think Linda's right, it's out of the model charter, because I'm looking at Newburgh's and they got the exact same thing.
Yeah, I'm talking about 38.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
merit
don't do
system.
any of that.
The longer I go, the less I'm
Yeah,
found out
leaving it
the
in
whole
there
charter,
makes
frankly.
no sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which like 99% of the cities adopted in
Right.
2005.
Yeah.
Word for word verbatim.
Yeah.
well, does the council have a resolution that says the city manager gets to do all this? Because if that's the case.
That
then
would
that's
take care of
their-
it,
That's
wouldn't
their
it? That would be the
resolution.
rule.
Yeah.
Well, we don't pass resolutions on recruitment, selection, promotion,
No,
transfer.
all your resolution have to say is, we're letting the city manager do this.
Is the city manager's contract adopted by resolution? Yes.
Yes.
Does the city manager's
And,
contract provide that he'll do these things?
That's part of his,
Okay.
his day-to-day
And I
management
think
of
Elise
the,
is,
That's your resolution,
ideas, yeah.
and it's accurate, it seems like.
Didn't the committee discuss the adoption of the employee manual, and
Cause that's where all that
if
stuff
this,
is.
this language being in the employee manual? I thought we
I
had that
remember we
discussion.
had a discussion about that, yes.
So does the city council
Yes.
by
Did they adopt
resolution
the
adopt
employee
this?
manual?
And not consistently, they have not in
No.
the past, no, it's been very
Yeah.
inconsistent. Probably 8, 9 years ago, I think was probably the last resolution where the council adopted the employee manual.
actually, I don't think it was that long. Tom redid it during his pro tem.
I
You
don't
adopted it?
remember it.
But I don't think we got it adopted.
Cause it seems like adopting that would take care of that as well.
Or Joe's contract, I think, would do it too.
I don't know
Because
whether they use the word merit.
the council is the one
Because
that
it was,
Yeah.
issued the
not
contract.
ordinance, so.
So is there a problem that we need to fix, or is this an issue where, the problem is we have questions about whether the language is being followed?
I think we need to delete it, because I don't think council should get the idea that they could pick an individual employee
That's my.
and rate his fitness. It's not their job.
But they don't get to do that anyway if it's not by resolution. Right.
That's true.
I mean, are those issues mentioned here, recruitment, selection, promotion, transfer, are those policy decisions or are those day-to-day management decisions that the city manager's office takes care of?
So the operative phrase is rules governing, right? And so I think what this
Yes.
means is the council could be the one who establishes the system, which the city manager then executes. So this is the system, not the individual decisions under the system. I think if I had to make an argument of have they done this, the argument I'd make is they did it by delegating the authority via the contract to the city manager. Whether that's legal or not, I don't know.
That's true.
Well, if that is the case, wouldn't be the rules governing the system of recruitment, adding that term, it would clarify. Do you
Well,
think
I'm
that
not
that's
sure that there's
what
a
this is
problem
saying?
here.
Yeah,
And I suspect that if we were to try and delete that,
Wow.
an argument in a ballot would be
Oh, yeah.
difficult and possibly contentious.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
vote
Using-
I think
for, I
that's
vote
a
for
good
not
point.
messing with it.
And it's up to, it's really an issue for the council to figure out whether they've complied with it or not. Brian, what do you think?
Is a strategic thing, I kind of see the light. And don't have as much problem with it.
As you maybe did a few minutes ago?
Yeah, I was thinking they would reach down and touch individuals.
Okay.
But no,
With the rules governed.
Joe's contract and the employee manual. I
But
think
if you
they
read
have the
it-
right to weigh in on that.
But if you read it that way, who's to say someone else isn't gonna read it
Well,
that
that's
way
true,
too?
yeah.
And so, I'm
Yeah,
just,
but it would take four councilors.
Pass a resolution.
To pass a resolution. One counselor couldn't do it.
okay,
Oh,
all right,
Right.
yeah.
You know, you used to have, and it would still probably be questioned if you had a majority, if you had a council that was looking at a resolution with this
Yes.
language, saying per charter,
Yes,
blah, 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 it'd be a red flag. There'd be questions.
so there's no need for a clarifying language in
No,
this?
I mean,
Okay.
it has not been a problem and,
Okay,
And people get
Just-
hired and promoted and transferred and demoted and laid off all the time, and their attorneys would be looking at this and trying,
Okay.
if there were an issue, it would have already been exposed long
Yeah.
ago by somebody who.
yeah, good point, that sold me.
I mean, there's the curious part of me is like, why was it put in the model charter? You know, I
Yeah.
could still ask that question, but, it's just weird language.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you know, it'd make me much happier if it just said the city's employee manual,
Yeah,
you know, and left it at that. Council shall approve, you know, because they just lifted words out of it.
yeah. And I think the employee manual should go to council,
Mhm.
because there are policies for the organization within that manual that they should weigh in on.
Well, you could put down at the very end, after merit and fitness, per the city's employee manual, if you wanted to reference it, as per the city's employee manual.
I'm for not messing with it. I think it's fine.
I'm still there too.
No problem with it,
Yeah.
leave it the way it is.
Don't fix it.
Okay.
Alright,
How's-
alright, thanks for bringing that up, Jeff.
Yeah.
It's 20 minutes when they're.
I'll be quiet.
Never get that time back. Alright, let's look at 42 and 43, which is the, speaking of strategic, the solid waste incinerator, yeah.
One suggestion, sorry.
Almost.
You could, when you review council rules,
Mhm.
suggest that the council follow what's listed in the charter by having some rule that reminds us or reminds future councils to review these policies and procedures as they relate to Joe's operation of, day-to-day operation of the city. So,
Yeah.
that's all I'm saying.
Alright, so, solid waste incinerators and Willamette River drinking water. Let's talk about Willamette River drinking water, just because I actually have been around long enough to know the history on that. I don't know the history for Sherwood on the solid waste incinerators. I know it's more generically. For Willamette River drinking water, this was a charter amendment passed 12 or so.
2001.
Yeah, before we were hooked up to the Willamette system. We then had a vote, the vote passed, although there's apparently some current argument that maybe it wasn't according to Hoyle. I don't follow the argument there. And the question is, since we are now.
According to whom?
Kirk Christensen.
Oh, yeah.
No,
Now that we are drinking Willamette River water, do we need this provision?
no, you don't.
I agree with that.
But you wanna touch it?
I would be afraid it would fail.
I know.
If we put it on the ballot.
It should never go.
So let me suggest something.
Yeah.
Just as, because Wilsonville has within their charter, their current charter, the city of Wilsonville shall not use Willamette River water as drinking water source for its citizens, blah, 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 blah. However, they have language that somehow was inserted that says, Section 43 is a charter amendment voted upon and approved by a majority of the qualified voters of the city. Well, that doesn't help. Charter amendment voted, could we put some language that somehow the city voted,
To repeal that or whatever.
no, not to repeal, but to
To author,
to
we
authorize.
use the provision
Right.
and authorize
So you
it.
can keep the language in there, but there's some, clarification that the voters actually voted yes to use it on such and such date. I mean,
You could do it parenthetically.
yeah, some kind of,
Yeah.
You need to change the charter.
Well, so in state, no, I don't think you do. In state statute, there are lots of statutes where the legislature just passed a bill that says it'll be the law, whatever, and they didn't actually amend an ORS. And legislative council goes and finds after the session the right ORS to put it in, and at the bottom it says, the legislature didn't enact this as an amendment, we put it here ourselves. You could, do something like that as basically an editorial
That's not a bad
appendage to the
idea.
charter.
That's right, because, if you're keeping this as a record of what's been voted on, what's been done, then adding something indicating that by voters voted, in 2000, what year was it, 2008? What year was it?
2005 or something like that.
Approved use of
Not long
water.
after the charter.
So there's a running history there.
Now, what's Kurt's argument that it wasn't a fair election?
I don't recall. No, I don't recall the argument.
No.
I wouldn't want to try to characterize it.
We're not gonna ignore that discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just thought, after the first sentence, use of Willamette River water as a residential drinking water source within the city was approved by voters in X date.
Yeah.
And then you remove the rest of it, or the prohibition.
No,
I don't think you can do that.
no. I don't wanna change.
But I think you
the
could add
charter.
that sentence after
I
and
think-
put it in
Yeah,
brackets.
because right now, all that's in brackets is approved by voters November 2001.
Yes, and then you could add a second bracketed, voters authorized use of Willamette River water in whatever the date was.
2005, it was 2005.
It seems to me you're working too hard, and the harder you work, it's gonna be harder to sell too, because you're gonna have more and more explanations.
No, we don't have to do
No,
that.
no.
We're just saying Sylvia could do this.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Added language.
what I would look at, I guess my question is, as a cleanup, do we wanna suggest deleting that entire paragraph?
No,
Why
Give
not?
it another 10 years.
Well,
Okay, you think,
But people
well,
forget.
even if that was rejected, it doesn't change it.
Well, so here's the problem with that, is if, I really hate the notion of people voting in a way that has no effect, because all you do is feed apathy about voting. And so if you give them a choice and they choose no, and no doesn't mean anything, I think you've actually done damage.
Yeah, I just think we put another parens in there. And that doesn't have to go to the vote, because it's just a
That's
statement.
just an explanatory, that's how the document is displayed.
Because 10 years from now, let's say this stays in here for 10 years and there's new people here that don't remember how this happened. And
Yes.
some new city manager says, how the heck are we drinking Willamette River water? It says in the charter you're not allowed.
Yes.
It would be nice for that answer to be right there. Oh, the voters approved it on such and such a date.
Well, I see the bracket here. I mean, is that actually part of the charter? Or was that an explanation?
You mean in parentheses, it says
Added by.
approved by
I don't
voters?
think that's part of the charter.
I don't think that's part of
Well,
the
it's
charter.
not part of the
Is
home
that-
rule charter that was adopted in 2005. These are provisions that have been added over time, and that's why they include a date.
Yeah. And it could say originally approved by voters November 2001, and then add some kind of,
Use of Willamette River water was approved by voters in 2003
or 4 or
or
whatever.
whatever, yeah.
It just
Yeah.
provides those answers that
And it
someone's gonna
provides the
ask.
context, absolutely.
So I guess then the question is that we're suggesting to add that sentence to the charter, the use of Willamette water.
No, more specifically, I think we're proposing that the city recorder added it to the display of the charter.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Because I was concerned that if you were gonna-
We're not adding it to the charter, we're adding it to what you see when you look at, to the information you have available when you look at the charter.
So like right now, when you look at it, it says approved by the voters in 2001. Technically, that is not part of the charter, but it's been added as
So
explanation.
this
How the
is,
heck did we repeal
Oh,
it?
okay, all right.
This is,
Yeah.
to all of you, so if you look at the bottom, certain sections, in small print, it says charter amendment adopted at a general primary election held November 4th, 1986, and a general primary election held May 15th, 1990. That's not part of the charter.
Right.
But it gives you some history in terms of what's happened.
State statutes have the same thing, where at the end of each chapter, it's got a list of when each section was last modified. Those modification dates aren't part of the statute, but they're in the book as, with the statute, same
So
principle.
if you were, if, Joe Citizen was looking at the charter, that would be in there as informational purposes, it's not the official part of the charter.
Right.
But I mean, clearly,
It's
we
more of a
don't
formatting.
want it to
Okay.
appear on the ballot whether or not we're asking for their approval. Don't wanna go there.
So are we comfortable with that as our recommendation?
Yeah, we just need to asterisk and put election under protest. Kirk Christensen.
See, Kurt,
So what will be the language?
We'll figure that out.
Yeah, because it's gonna be up to you.
Home
guys.
run
So
hitters
Kurt, no,
asterisk for,
Right.
he might have used
So
steroids.
let's move on to solid waste incinerators. This is a similar issue that's a little hairier, age-wise. And it was back about the time, I think, that Salem built its garbage incinerator.
Well, somebody wanted to put one,
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
live talk of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was.
I don't think anybody's building these anymore, but that's not to say that someone might not come up with that idea at some point in the future, I guess.
they probably wanted to build the incinerator out by the tannery. I don't know if they tried.
It would have been a better idea than what they did do with it,
That's right.
Up at Ken Foster Farms,
among other places.
among other
And
places.
then we'd have the downwinders.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna suggest it, there's a part of me that this is so old and ORS has changed and incinerators have changed, that if you propose to eliminate this because this is outdated and the voters say no, it stays in there. I mean, what do you have to lose by asking
That's
to
true.
remove it? And then you
Because
get a
it's-
sense of, okay, what do people think about removing outdated language in the charter?
What is the statute about solid waste
I have
incinerators?
no
Do you
idea.
know?
I'm assuming if this was adopted in 1990, that I bet you those ORSs have changed.
Well, only one that I know of has ever been built in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if the state rules have changed about Operation Solid Waste Incinerators.
There are some in the state.
Are we back to Pat's discussion you have something that the voters would be voting on something that doesn't mean
Hermiston or
anything.
Umatilla or?
I mean, whether or not they say yes or no, nothing changes.
That's
And
true.
So do we just leave it? And
But we could in the description say we're removing this language, we're proposing to remove this language because it's outdated language, because the statutes have changed, or it just isn't relevant anymore.
I
Why
bet these
wouldn't this-
statutory sites aren't even
Water
accurate.
Why would this not be in an ordinance?
Well, because you wouldn't want a council, presumably,
To repeal
voters
the-
didn't want the council to be able to just
To make a
repeal it, they
decision.
wanted it to have to be voted on.
Yeah.
Okay,
And-
all right. Yeah.
You know, again, the argument, what we're gonna get up there, well, we wanna remove the ordinance that says you can't have a solid waste.
Medical center.
I mean, I don't, oh, you want them then? No.
Yeah, I mean, this, as I read, this is just an awful charter provision in terms of
Yes.
its construct. It's a perfectly fine thing to wanna prohibit. It's ugly as heck, but I
Leave it alone.
You know,
Sounds like an
in the
argument.
explanation that you said, it makes it clear why we want to remove this. It's outdated, et cetera, et cetera. Let the people know, and I think that they'll say, okay, fine, why would you want to keep something in the charter
Yeah,
that has no relevance, it's outdated, and it'll never be referenced?
Well, let me suggest this then, if we think we do wanna take a run at eliminating this, let's find out what the current state of
see how
state law is on this.
Inconsistent or consistent it is with current law.
Yeah, if there's
Because if we can make an argument that says state law now prohibits this generally, and
Yeah.
so it's not, this language is
That's
not
what
necessary,
that's what I'm
then I
saying,
can make
yeah.
that argument.
Yes.
And
Because I
people
don't think that,
decide-
yeah.
for like infectious waste, I think there is a prohibition on burning of infectious waste within city limits.
Well, I don't know, Salem's importing it from Canada.
Yes.
We'll have to
So let me
work
look
that
into
out.
it, because I have no idea.
Alright, so we'll come back to that one.
All we need to do is look at the ORS.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if these are 25-year-old ORS references.
Well, it'll tell you if whether it's repealed or replaced
Yeah.
or.
No.
Well, I assume there's a
Superseded.
state law citing these things. There's gotta be a state law.
DEP probably has.
You
Yeah.
would like to believe.
Yeah.
Alright, so we're gonna come back to that one. I think that gets us to the end of the things that we have flagged, yes, Alderman? Is that right?
I have some things.
Okay.
The last
Yeah.
one.
Go ahead.
As far as what's on the correct.
Yeah.
So, a couple things, one thing that you asked last time is related to ordinance, because right now we have a system where ordinances can be approved by council one night.
Mhm.
And I looked up, I have two other cities in terms of different options. So one option is the Lake Oswego option, and I don't think we need to discuss this tonight, you can take it with you and read it. But a little bit more clarity about ordinance adoption. It says a proposed ordinance shall be filed with the city recorder at least 1 week prior to the council meeting. Talks about notice. Talks about a proposed ordinance may be considered and enacted at a single meeting of the council. But if the council substantially amends the ordinance as presented, enactment shall be continued to a second meeting. And then it defines what substantial amendment is. So this is a system where you basically can do it in one night, but if you change it substantially, you gotta go to a second night. This is one scenario to consider. The second scenario is the one that I'm more familiar with, which is West Lynn, and this is what we had in Fairview, where you have, it has to be done in 2 nights.
So you have the first reading and the
Yes.
second reading.
But you can do, it says, and you can read this,
Urgency?
except as paragraph C of this section provides, an ordinance may be enacted at a single meeting of the council by unanimous vote of the council members present upon being read first in full and then by title. So again, these are different variations, and I'm not saying they're perfect, but they're a little bit more, I think the intent of these is more public process and more public involvement, that you don't enact laws in one night without the chance to amend them or to have public comment.
Well, and then you can do it in one night, but it's gotta be unanimous.
Yeah.
And immediately.
So,
Declaring an emergency, basically.
But it requires unanimous to do it.
so I was gonna suggest taking this and maybe looking at them and then,
Okay.
and comparing it to what we do now.
Plus, we did run some language last time, and so we could really kind of look at those through. We basically said it's gotta be available for a week.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, the first reading, second reading method is how the school board does that.
That's
With
what
ours,
we
ours being a month apart.
Well, and if you're gonna enact an ordinance and you require a week's notice, then you're no longer able to do walk-ons.
For ordinances.
Right, for ordinances.
And
Well,
we-
unless we do go with
It's
the
an emergency.
unanimous vote language.
Yeah.
So anyway, I
Alright,
just
so
look at these.
mull that and we'll talk about that at our next meeting.
In my view of ordinances is you're enacting law. And anytime you enact law, that should be somewhat a slow deliberative process. A resolution is different. It's an action of the council, you can do that in one night. Enacting laws, we don't do a lot of them. And that's why I think you see other jurisdictions that have kind of a, first and second reading or some kind of two-step process. And it would eliminate walkouts.
I think a first and second reading is important if you're repealing a resolution, or, I don't know what was the term, no.
Substantial.
I don't know what substantial means, but
It's
if
defined in
a
one.
previous council enacted an ordinance because they thought it was in the best interest of the citizens, and you're repealing it, I think that deserves more than one reading.
I think it would fall.
Repealing and
Yes,
or
because
amending
you're
and
changing.
replacing, yeah. But.
So I just think there's some interesting language you might wanna grapple with.
Okay.
And then the other thing I sent you late this afternoon was some language that comes from the Multnomah County Charter. And when I was on the Charter Review Commission there, I know Multnomah County, don't be scared. That talks about, there's two sections when you look at it. One is about how does the charter get changed? Who has the authority of changing the charter, and how does it get that the council, or in effect, the county board of commissioners can put a charter amendment, or citizens can put a charter amendment on, but there's some timeframes that, there's some clarity around charter amendments in terms of process. And then the second part of that is creation of a charter review committee. They have every 6 years, a charter review committee is gonna be created, and here's their purpose. Ignore, when you look at that, how they're selected, because it's some convoluted state senators recommend, it's crazy. So that section, ignore, but take a look at it, and we haven't had a charter review committee for many, many, many years. And there's the argument that every, quote, 5 years or 8 years, a citizen charter review committee should be formed to look at the charter. That's the argument I'm trying to make.
Okay.
Rather than have it just be, well, I'm the mayor, I think we should have a charter review committee.
Yeah.
It's sad.
The countervailing argument would be that darn if the Multnomah County Charter Review Committee, when it gets set up every however many years, comes up with a whole passel of potential charter amendments, most of which are just terrible ideas.
That's, again, I'm looking at process, not the result of the process.
Well, why are we making council review council rules every year? Because we want them to become more familiar with the process and the procedures.
Because you
I
have a
just feel like if
certain
it's not
expectation.
written down, anything goes. So
Yeah.
there's not some rules, some basic guidelines to follow. Things just
Yeah,
get this amorphous cloud, and who knows what comes out of it.
I just have to get over my bias of this is the first time I've ever heard the Multnomah County Charter used as a good example.
Whether it's every 10 years or every 5 or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know what the number is, I'm just throwing out,
Right.
do you think as citizens that a citizen committee should be looking at the charter on a routine basis, whether it's once every 10 years or once every 8 years? And if the answer is yes, should that be in the charter itself with some
Right.
guidance in terms of,
And we don't actually have anything about it.
You don't have nothing.
I was gonna say, what's the alternative?
We
Nothing.
got
Nothing
in there
now.
Yeah, that's, okay. All right, so charter amendment process stuff, we should be on there.
And then Pat, I had a couple of
Yeah.
toss-ups.
Sure.
Doesn't mean I support them or not support them, but
Do you wanna
talked to
hear
a
about
couple of people out in the field, and I said, well, hey, I'll toss them up and see where they go. One question which came up during talking to a citizen after the budget committee was whether or not a financial officer, whether it be the budget director or a CFO of some sort, should be employed by the council rather than being employed by the city manager. I said, that wasn't an unreasonable question.
And what was the argument for that?
That, it's, I guess, along the same lines of the city attorney, which is that they are highly required and responsible for the operations of the budget over the entire year. And that whether or not should they be reporting directly to the council with greater control over the budget rather than reporting to the city manager. I said it wasn't an unreasonable question.
Well,
Is this-
here's the way I look at it. If you're a project manager and you're managing a project and somebody else is making the budget for you,
Mhm.
that's two people touching things that could potentially,
Describes my job, actually.
mine too, right? I'm managing projects, but I'm setting the budget, cause, right? I mean, why would I manage a project and have someone else set the budget? If I'm managing a project, I will go to people working on my project to determine whether I have a good budget. It just seems like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
The city manager, I don't know,
City manager's responsible for the budget, so.
yeah.
Yeah.
Should declare to the city manager.
Yeah, but the flip side of the coin too is a lot of corporations have a CFO, chief financial officer.
Yeah.
Which reports to
I think
the
that's
the
what
board of
they're-
directors.
Is that accurate?
Uh,
I think most CFOs report to the CEO.
CEO,
Yeah, not to the board, to the
Yeah.
CEO.
never
Yeah.
report to the board.
In my experience.
The
auditor
The auditor
reports-
reports to the board.
Yes.
And
Well,
the
and
auditor
I'm-
here, our auditor reports to the council.
Right,
So the auditor, or the auditing firm,
right.
is hired by the council.
And, you know, on the opposite side, rather than project manager, I work quality control, quality assurance. Quality assurance officer of a company reports directly to the board. And that in most codes, it's written that way.
And why is that?
Conflict of interest. For example, quality control doesn't report to the production, because production could have, hey, we wanna ship it out the door, whether or not quality control is there or not. So there's a short circuit there
That makes sense.
to prevent that. But anyway, as I said, I just toss it up. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of interest for it. And then the other one that I just wanted to toss up, and this is one that Kurt brought up early on in his public testimony, was an ombudsman. Whether or not we wanted to take a look at some sort of opportunity for the public to appeal or at least discuss or establish another line of communications to the city administration besides just going to city council and saying, I think that, you know, Joe's doing a really bad job and, you know,
So one way you could do that would be to identify, say, the city clerk as the ombudsperson. By the way, this continues my ongoing search for the generic plural non-gender specific word for ombudsman. Because the ombuds.
well, and actually, the one thought that came up at the time was the hearings officer, who's a little bit further removed from administration control. Or actually, maybe not necessarily, even either the hearings officer or the judge. Whether or not they could act or establish some sort of ombudsman role.
Well, just talking it through out loud, the first reaction I have for either the city, either the municipal judge or the hearings officer is those are always attorneys. And if you ask a legal person a question, you're gonna get a legal answer, which is probably not what someone going to an ombudsperson would be looking for.
Right.
They do have the benefit of the arm's length relationship, so they're not an employee of the city manager. They are all employees of the council. I don't think there's any way to escape that, nor do I think there should be, which is what kind of gets me to the clerk, as someone who's already an arm's length employee of the council. I mean, if what we're looking for in an ombudsperson is someone other than the city manager to go to with a concern.
It depends on the concern. I guess if there's a problem with department or a staff person, I mean, there's a chain of command in terms of Susie Q's not doing her job in the building department. Well, they should go to her boss and say, hey, she's not doing her job. I mean, creating another person that doesn't if you're not happy with the city manager, you should go to council, because the city manager reports to the council. And if he or she isn't doing the job, creating an ombudsman isn't necessarily gonna help the process. I mean, if that position isn't doing the job, the council needs to hear that.
Yes, so.
I don't want the council, no offense, hearing about
Yeah.
an issue deep in the organization that we've got supervisory levels that we can address. And I don't want an ombudsman, a new position that reports, I mean, it just seems very convoluted.
Well, and I don't have good examples of where an ombudsman works and doesn't work. I know the city of Portland has an office of ombudsman.
So I have a,
And my experience in those positions is when you're having a problem getting through the bureaucracy, you go to that office, and that person or that office is there to help you get through the process.
I'll get, okay.
well, I was gonna say, I have an Office of Injured Worker Ombudsman as part of my agency, which fulfills two roles. One is that, cutting through the, helping you negotiate the bureaucracy, which I don't think is a terribly relevant issue for us, but it also does actually provide an advocacy role. The ombudsperson doesn't report to the workers' compensation division, they report to me. Now, me in my case, because that's our structure, and having them report to the legislature wouldn't work, but the idea is the ombudsperson can and does come to me and say, I think the division's on the wrong track on this, and we've been working this issue, and they're heading down this path, and I think that may not be the right path to go, and so it becomes a sort of a relief valve for resolving a potential, policy issue, or sometimes you get into issues where there's just a clash of whoever's trying to deal with each other.
Yeah.
And you get a safety valve function out of that. And it's not so much the fact that the person reports to the council doesn't mean it's a way to go to the council, it's a way to go somewhere else, because going the right way just for whatever reason isn't working.
I think that position is a really good example. I've worked with her and she's fantastic. And it's a very highly complex system that you're dealing with as well. And trying to put different pieces together and making sure these are your workers. We're a city of 26,000 people. Our bureaucracy is not that large.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure if we would need a position.
I'm not sure it's a charter issue. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, it's almost, if it's gonna be an office, it's like the planning department or, whatever. I don't think the charter doesn't say what departments the city needs to, have. I don't feel like it's something that.
Well, the only thought that occurred to me as a charter issue is you could, where you've got the already existing charter provision of there being a city clerk, is you could simply add the city clerk shall function as the city ombudsman, and it wouldn't be anything more complicated.
Then you'd have to define what it
Yeah,
is.
there's
Duties and
responsibilities that
responsibilities.
may be something.
So in your.
An ombudsman, I've worked in a corporation with an ombudsman. It worked because it was an elder statesman. It was a man or woman who had been around for years that was highly respected. They reported to the board of directors. Their role was to intercede on highly confidential matters that affected employees or projects, areas such as maybe fraud was a possibility, whatever. But they reported to the board, and this city does not need an ombudsman. And it definitely should not be a city clerk or somebody within the organization itself. It needs to be somebody who's separate and distinct, that is highly respected, and employees feel confident going to, that anything they bring up will be confidential and will not affect their employment. So, I don't think it needs it. If we had to vote, I'd vote definitely against it here. And I don't think that we need to spend the money to go out and hire an ombudsman to sit and wait for things to come to their office.
So in your example, Pat, the person who comes to you, is their role to right a wrong or to mediate? and help find a solution that both parties can live with?
They're neither. Their role is to,
Or they get to pass the buck to you?
no, their role is to help a person negotiate the bureaucracy most of the time. And then in cases where there is an underlying policy issue, to advocate for that policy issue to me.
And she attends MLAC
Yeah,
meetings
then
and
there's a-
addresses potential statute changes.
Right.
But she doesn't necessarily just do that for one person,
Can.
Some individuals.
right? But you would amend a statute for one person.
No, but she
That would be a
provides
broader,
that
like-
insight, so,
Yeah.
I mean, she'll provide because often it's called that management labor advisory committee, you have a lot of stakeholders in that room that may not, you've got insurers, you've got trial lawyers, she provides that voice of
The interpreter.
So then she'll share particular evidence regarding specific instances where, well, this is the case or that case, because she does help with particular individual cases as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have very few individual cases where that's a unique case. We may know about the one, but if we know about the one, there are likely others that are in the same circumstance. So it doesn't sound like I'm hearing a lot of juice for
But
that.
I
am
appreciate
curious
the
though about
discussion.
what was Kurt's, support? What was his supporting information about why he thought an ombudsman would be necessary? I'm just curious.
It's probably in the notes, because I remember.
Right,
reading-
and
I remember him bringing
Right.
that up, but I just don't remember exactly why.
I'm, to paraphrase or otherwise, from the way I kind of thought I heard it, is basically it's another entrance into the city, in as much that, Jim Klaus may be an example, that, he has become so, there's so much animosity between, say, a city manager and this individual, that those two individuals cannot work together. And is there an opportunity with an ombudsman to provide some direction?
And but would that person be a paid member, or they'd be a volunteer?
I mean, there's all sorts of questions when that comes.
How long would they volunteer?
By incident.
I'm an ombudsman.
Yeah.
People come to me all the time,
Yeah.
when they're not happy with planning, or public works, or police, or
And
jail.
I have to agree back here that we're not that city of that size, of bureaucracy of that size.
Yeah, and I think you guys play that role, I play that role, my managers play that role, depending on who's dissatisfied with something, or they're in a stalemate, they go to that person. Part of my job is to find out what's going on, why is this taking so long? Is there something
And
I'm
again,
missing here?
I don't wanna say I'm an advocate for it, but
Yeah.
toss the ball
I'm
up
glad
for
you
discussion.
did bring
If
that
we
up.
had seven, three-quarters of a million residents, and all of a sudden, city council cannot be, I mean, often
Yeah.
in Portland, the city council will refer to the ombudsman
Yep.
to kind of run down
Yep.
resources and.
I would like to
Makes
see the
sense there.
citizenry be well-informed and not be willfully ignorant on the average before we employ an ombudsman.
Careful.
I don't have.
Talking
any
about the
numbers.
voters.
One thing that some communities provide is a mediation service. Like if two residents can't get along and need to have somebody help them,
Isn't that available through Washington County?
No, not here.
probably if you wanna drive to Washington County.
It's a,
For certain things, they provide a free mediator.
Washington County does
Yeah,
provide.
but
that
you have to
in
go up
the
there.
city of
Yeah.
Beaverton.
Beaverton's got it, and we could, because, and this may not be the case, 185th used to be the boundary, so if you're in the county west of 185th, you went to the county, and if you were east, you went to Beaverton. We had a dispute resolution center in the mayor's office, that technically it's a Beaverton program, but it provides services beyond Beaverton. And I've actually thought about formalizing that more, so we could refer some cases out of, where there's no codes being violated, but there's a dispute.
Yeah.
There's no laws, but there's still a dispute, and it's kind of a disservice. And we had that service in
And we don't have
Beaverton,
that
we don't
here
have
now.
that. And
Why
we don't
do
have
we
that
not have that
relationship,
now?
and.
Yeah,
and
right
I
now,
think
it's code compliance officer Bill Collins.
Yes.
Yes.
And I
One
think
neighbor
that
calls
would
him,
be-
the other neighbor calls him, and
Yeah, that would be a great service that we should do, but again, I don't think it's a charter thing, it's really, how do we provide that service utilizing existing resources in another community, can we partner with them?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Because I think Tigard partners officially, they have an IGA, so the Beaverton program covers Beaverton and Tigard. And Tigard throws a little bit of money on the table.
But that's not a charter issue.
It's not a charter issue.
Okay. Let me throw one more issue out that I can think of. I guess Kurt Christensen's suggestion that I think is worth kicking around, and that's runoffs. Now that we've made the change that we did on the council positions, I don't think a runoff situation there makes sense. But in mayoral elections, right now, the circumstance we have is if we have 5 people run for mayor, whoever gets the most votes, even if that's 22%, gets elected mayor. If we had a runoff, then the top 2 would run in the next, we'd have to do some parameters around dates and things like that. So, and there are some pros and cons, but let me throw that one out. The biggest con in my mind is, if you don't have a runoff, because of the time you had allowed for there to be a runoff, you have potentially a very long mayor-elect period,
Right.
which can lead to perniciousness.
Well, and Beaverton has that program, or that system. So Beaverton councilors and the mayor always run in this past election. There's always a primary, no matter how many candidates. And usually there's only 2 candidates for council. And usually the decision's made in May, which is a smaller turnout. And it's a done deal. There's no election in the fall when there's a larger turnout.
And
I
then
always
spend
like-
7 months waiting to actually become mayor.
Exactly, so it's just like, personally, I'm not a big fan of that system because I think a very small number are actually making the decision. You don't have, if you had a situation where you had on an ongoing basis 5 or 6 candidates for positions and a small minority was electing the mayor, I think you could address it, but you don't have that problem here.
Right.
You know, even if you have 3 candidates, you know, no, it doesn't matter. I mean, it could be a small number, but when was the last time you had 3 candidates for mayor in this community?
Not since I've lived here.
Never.
So
Not since
again,
I've lived here.
I think it's an interesting discussion, but it goes back to what you guys keep saying, what's the problem here? What are we trying to address? You don't have a problem with a small number of voters electing either the mayor or councils here. It's not been a problem in this community.
Yeah, because conversely in Portland, they do typically have a dozen or more
Exactly.
people run
Yeah.
for mayor.
So it'd be addressing a potentiality that,
Yeah.
that percent of that
Right.
happening might be 10%, 20%.
Or we could end up also having a string of it,
Yeah.
when there would be then the next 5-year iteration of the charter review committee. Or
Yeah.
That, and I might be concerned that all of a sudden we added a whole bunch of words in general elections.
Yeah.
Now we're taking it out of the general election.
Because you have to have the runoff earlier than the general election.
Right.
Are the only election dates open for us for municipal elections, the May primary and the November general, or is there another election?
Special.
September
In March.
Yeah, but then
and March, but
Yeah.
No.
as far as I'm concerned with our voting rate, we should never have an election except in November. Because we have less than a third of our citizens voting.
Yeah, we do have a disappointing.
And I don't know how we
Well-
can make
It's
it
not
any
just us,
easier.
I mean, it's the whole,
Go door to door, give me your ballot.
you're not allowed to do that.
And that would be the
No,
only
I
way that
know.
would make sense, is to do it on have the primary be on the September election with
Mhm.
the general in November. But you're right.
Mm,
Now you're talking cost.
You could do, no.
Well, I don't know if we can make the deadline for,
You'd have to change a budget then.
yeah, because when would the September election be certified? And I don't think there'd be enough time to get it on the November election, you'd have to do it in May.
Oh, okay.
Which is probably why Beaverton does it in the
May,
spring.
yeah.
To allow enough time for the
Yeah.
general.
I just can't see 7 months of, mayor.
Because the other thing that's weird, that, like, if Counselor A wins in May and gets 51% or more, they're still on the ballot in November, but they're not running against anyone. I mean, it's just weird. It's
That
just
was
like,
90% of our ballot this election,
That-
they were all
and-
unopposed,
and-
most of
and-
them.
yeah.
What kind of trouble could a lame duck council or a lame duck mayor create in 7 months?
Well, imagine if we'd had that circumstance in our last election.
Good point.
Okay. All right, that's another trial balloon.
It was a great idea, though.
Well,
That was interesting.
Keep them coming.
Any other interesting ones to throw up there? Neil Shannon?
No, that's pretty much was the thoughts that I had.
All right, anyone else got any issues they want to lay on the table? I think we're getting to the point now where we have a few pending ones sitting out there, and then we need to come back and basically look at these for grouping them into bite-sized pieces, as we talked about earlier. I think that ended up being a very successful way to approach this. And we're about there.
Joe, thanks for sending out that article about, it was in Milwaukee, about living in Milwaukee, not in Milwaukee or
I think
whatever.
that, if I remember correctly, it failed miserably. Or
Mhm.
maybe it
It
did.
It did,
So,
Yeah, it did,
That was to require the,
to reside in the city.
City manager to reside in the city.
yes, yes,
Yeah, they were trying to
Full
force
city or not.
him to move to
Yeah, that was good.
Milwaukee.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that
just
was
don't
interesting.
think that in this day and age, that's, I mean, if you were to figure like far out and lack communication, that may have made a difference, but now. These have days,
Yeah, I
they're
agree with
really
that.
visible.
I just went to a sort of a state of the city address that the Wilsonville Chamber of Commerce put together, and so there was Aurora, Canby, Westland, myself, Wilsonville. And I mentioned the charter change, and I said, you know, how we had reformed a citizens review committee. Every charter was individually, you know, its own measure, its own ballot title, and that they all passed. And I said, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's the only way to communicate with your citizens. And I had 4 people come up to me and say, you know, can I go to coffee or lunch or call you or?
any of us for a reasonable fee would be a good.
I'll just forward those,
Good
yeah.
advice.
Small stipend.
So at least you
Exactly.
can get
It has to be
paid, but I
actual
can't.
expense.
Chair,
Yeah.
Work for beer, wine.
Take over
That's
what you
right.
want from me, I have to provide that within less than a week.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
So
exactly.
you need to kind of narrow me in.
All right, on what specifically?
So basically, the similar notes, what I have, are discussion with the city attorney. You want to use the language of council instead of authority. Section 35, I have to section 37, compensation, you're gonna defer that to a future discussion. You guys discussed section 3, section 7 on compensation, and you've had some language there. The mayor and the council shall.
Well, actually, on 37, I think what,
We were gonna leave it there.
Yeah,
we made some changes, and we wanted to pin the discussion there, but we wanted to see the changes back, I think.
So the change of adding the mayor and council shall not
Right.
be compensated, okay. No changes to section 38 merit system.
Right.
No changes to section 43 Willamette River, no changes, no.
Well, except on that one, just add.
Adding the,
Rand.
not as
The
part of
notes.
our recommendation.
Add the
but-
notes.
It'd be a note thing, but it wouldn't be.
Right.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a charge.
And we want feedback
I
on the
would
current.
reference the vote date.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and then on 42, we want information back on the current status of
So that
state law.
even, it's applicable.
And then we just had discussion on, Joe's gonna get some examples on the adoption of ordinances.
which I passed out.
Okay.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so we'll flag that as one to come back and talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
As well as the amendment process. The amendment and periodic
Or
review.
amendment timeline.
That crazy Multnomah County idea.
Is Charlie still serving?
Talked about that before you got here too. We need to touch bases with.
Okay, so then as we get closer to wrapping up, maybe section 1 title, we'll have to change maybe that 2005 charter. And then section 47, tax attack, we'll have to change that.
Okay.
So you want similar code,
Yeah.
color coded?
Yep, that seems to be working very well and making it. All right, anything else for the general good?
When do we meet next?
Yeah, was it?
Next Thursday,
Next Thursday?
Good.
6:30.
Next Thursday.
And if I remember, Pat, you will not be
29th.
here?
Let me
Because
see.
you were gonna shovel everything on top of my shoulders?
Some seek out leadership, others haven't thrust on it, but.
Well, you have to remember, you were appointed chairman at a meeting you didn't attend.
Yeah. Touche.
Yes, I will not be at that meeting, that's correct.
Ah.
Which day, the fifth?
29th.
And I'm unlikely to
Next
be
Thursday.
there. We meet, it's legislative days, so I mean, I'd be able to.
Well, that's right, you discussed about having a little bit.
Anybody else?
Thought we had something.
No, they're not gonna be there.
On the 29th.
Pardon?
Just checking to see if anybody else knows now that they will not be here. All right, anything else for the general good? Then we are adjourned.